I never imagined my third flight as a commercial co-pilot would turn into the kind of day people whisper about for years. The sort of story that doesn't just shake your nerves, but rewires how you see the world and yourself. We were somewhere over the Midwest, Flight 9821 cruising at 15,000 feet, slicing through storm clouds that looked tame from the ground, but up close were savage, electric, unpredictable. Then everything went wrong. The captain, Harris, slumped against the controls, a thin line of blood at his temple, and I swear the silence in that cockpit was louder than the storm outside. The stall warning blared, every gauge blinking red or black, and the stick went limp in my hands, dead weight, just like my confidence. This was the moment the simulator never prepared me for. Mayday, Mayday, Flight 9821. We've lost flight control, I shouted into the radio, barely holding the trembling in my voice at bay. I could hear the panic in the controller's voice on the other end, but all I really heard was the sound of my own heartbeat, deafening, relentless. Down in the cabin, chaos had erupted. Passengers clutched armrests, oxygen masks swayed wildly overhead, luggage tumbled into aisles. Somewhere in row 2F sat Julia, perfectly put together even as the world seemed to fall apart. Her 6-year-old daughter beside her, Emma, quiet, almost eerily calm, gripping a plush airplane like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Julia tried to calculate, to control, but Emma wasn't looking for comfort. She was looking for a way out. "Mommy, I think I can help," she whispered. But Julia's mind was on the flight attendants, the flickering lights, the mounting terror. It wasn't until Emma repeated herself, firmer this time, that Julia even looked her way. By then, Emma was already unbuckling, determined in that way only little kids can be, slipping through the chaos unnoticed, past terrified adults, until she reached the cockpit, left ajar in the mayhem that I was bracing myself for another jolt when I heard her small, steady voice. "I know what to do. I can help." I turned, stunned, and there she was, a tiny figure with wild curls, bare feet, wearing a gray hoodie, eyes far too calm for the storm around us. My brain screamed that this was impossible, some cruel prank, but the desperation in her voice was too real. "You can't recover from the stall unless you shift the aileron manually and reduce throttle, the left panel there," she said, pointing with a certainty that made my training seem laughable. I hesitated only a second. Another violent shake from the storm, and I let her in. Her hands, so small, worked the controls with a confidence I'd never seen. Throttle to 30%, no more. Stabilizer trim reset. A little left. I followed her commands, hardly breathing. It was like a miracle. Slowly, the nose lifted, the descent slowed, the wild spin settled into something like flight. I called the tower, voice shaking. "We've regained partial manual control, assisted by a very small, very brilliant passenger." They must have thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Emma kept her head. She guided me, her tone clear, her instructions calm. Turns out her mom had built her a flight simulator at home. A toy, sure, but one that drilled in her muscle memory and nerves of steel. She'd done this before, over and over, for fun. Now, it was life or death. Passengers stopped screaming. The crew stood in awe, and Julia, standing outside the cockpit, watched her daughter do what no adult on board could do. That we still had to land. Emergency airstrip, battered plane, nerves frayed to the breaking point. "Flaps full," Emma said softly. "Throttle down, gear confirmed." I did exactly as she told me. The runway loomed ahead, thin and gray, hope and terror all tangled together. The wheels hit the tarmac hard, bounced, then finally gripped. We rolled to a stop. For a second, nobody breathed. Then the cheers started, laughter, sobs. I announced, voice cracking, "A 6-year-old girl saved this plane." People erupted. Emma turned to me. "We did it." I shook my head. "You did." When her mom rushed in, falling to her knees and clutching Emma, I saw a kind of pride and awe I'll never forget. Outside, the world went wild. News crews, cameras, headlines about the miracle landing and the child hero. It was chaos again, but a different kind. People wanted to see Emma, talk to her, take her picture. Some doubted, some believed, but nobody could ignore what she'd done. That I kept my distance, but I couldn't stay away. 2 days later, I showed up at their house with a model airplane for Emma. You earned your wings, I told her. Somehow, that turned into dinners, afternoons fixing things, evenings spent reading stories or building makeshift simulators out of cardboard. Julia was guarded, wary. She'd built walls after a bitter divorce and a life spent proving herself in boardrooms, not trusting anyone. But little by little, she let me in, setting a second plate at the table, offering tea instead of water, asking about my flight's point one night. After Emma was asleep, Julia confessed she wasn't always so cold. It was easier, after everything, to shut out the world, she said, tracing the rim of her wine glass. I just listened. She talked about her ex, about being too much, too driven, about how she was afraid to trust again. I told her it sounded more like protection than ambition. For the first time, she smiled without reservation, but the storm wasn't over. As Emma's story went viral, the praise turned sour. People questioned, criticized, wondered if letting a child help was bravery or negligence. Julia read the headlines, watched the news vans circling their street, saw her daughter go from hero to target. Did I do something wrong? Emma asked one morning, voice shaking. Julia just held her, but the pain cut deep. One night, anger boiling, Julia turned on me. You should have stopped her. She's just a child. I tried to explain. Emma hadn't flown the plane. She'd remembered what nobody else could under pressure. But it hurt. For all of us, that I decided to speak up. I went on live TV, told the world Emma was brave, not reckless, that her mother had raised her to think, to stay calm, to believe she could help. And wasn't that what we wanted for our kids? The narrative shifted. People began to thank Julia. The noise died down. Life edged back toward normal. Then, of course, life changed again. I got reassigned, international flights, long hauls, months away. I told Julia in a text. The night before I left, we sat on the porch, Emma chasing fireflies in the yard. Julia wrapped herself in a blanket and said, "Don't forget, someone here will always be waiting." When I left the next morning, Emma handed me a drawing. 3 stick figures, one in a pilot's hat, one in a tiara, one with a laptop, captioned Captain, Princess, Mom. I tucked it into my jacket. That I was gone for 2 months. Emma talked about me like I was a star hidden behind the clouds. Julia left the porch light on a little longer each night. Then one Saturday, I knocked on their door, nervous, tired. Julia opened it, blinked once, then smiled, real and warm. Emma squealed and jumped into my arms. Julia just said, "You're late," but the way she said it felt like home. This time, I stayed. Requested a city route, rented a place 2 blocks away, started building routines, school pickups, grilled cheese Wednesdays, paper airplanes on Sundays. We didn't call it anything, but we were becoming something. A family, almost without noticing. One golden Sunday, we sat in the park, Emma running with a bright white paper plane, Julia leaning into my shoulder. "She's yours as much as mine," she whispered. I looked at her, surprised, and realized what we'd found wasn't just healing or even love. It was a safe landing after a storm I'd thought would never end. You know, sometimes, it's not the headlines or the heroics that change your life. It's the quiet, stubborn courage of a little girl, the patience of a mother learning to trust again, the silent promise of showing up for each other, day after day. That's what I learned at 15,000 feet, with nothing left but hope and the impossible. And if you ask me, sometimes the safest landing isn't on a runway, but right into someone's heart.